All right, welcome. Today we have Courtney Croucher, and we are going to be talking all about reclaiming dirty words about women. And just a really quick introduction. Courtney is the host of a podcast called the Strategic Slut podcast, and it is so much fun and R-rated and addressing really big topics, taboo topics that center around really empowering and unleashing women to reclaim things that have been oppressive or have been used to kind of silence or keep us small. And so, Courtney, I would love to hear from you and have you share how you really got interested and got started with creating this podcast and why, and get to share that from you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me here for first off. And so how I got started with the podcast, I always kind of from a young age, especially like in high school, was very just questioning everything that came up. Like anything that I heard or saw, I just would be like, why are things the way they are? And I hated how I remember there were a couple instances of like girls' nude pictures being leaked across the school, and the fact that the responsibility always fell onto the woman who set the photos, but not the people who leaked them. And little things like that I just always like turned my head and I'm like, I don't like that. That doesn't sit right with me. And I didn't have any of the language or verbiage to really dive into those issues. I didn't even know what to Google. It was something that was so hush hush. And if I were to question it, I never felt, it was always kind of like, stay in your lane kind of thing. Like, you're too young to ask these questions. This isn't appropriate, that kind of thing. And then in my first year of university, I went to Western for media information technoculture. And I, loved MIT, but I took a first year of women's studies course, ended up falling in love with women's studies. I had no idea what feminism was. I literally said before I even took a course, like, I don't want to be in a room full of feminists. And then here I am with a feminist-based podcast. But obviously that first year, course changed my life. I ended up double majoring in women's studies. And one of the courses I took was called How to Sex Ed. And it was all about the way that we learn about sex, speak on it, and how it's very informed by both medical and religious discourses, and how it's very detrimental to the way we speak on specifically women and the gendered implications within that, and also within the LGBTQ community and all those things. So there's just a lot of stuff that I was completely mind blown by, but also like things that I've always kind of considered growing up that never sat right with me. And that course changed my life. It kind of started a passion of talking about sexuality and this empowerment within sex. And I mean, I was having conversations about orgasms with my close girlfriends and stuff, but we were like, it was very, you're not in a coffee shop like, I had the best orgasm last night, the way that men were, so it was little things like that. And I was already a lover of podcasts myself. So, people told me growing up I talked too much, so I started a podcast. And if you're wondering why it's called Strategic Slut, it was kind of something that just came to me. It actually I don't know what it was. I just wanted something kind of cheeky and something that is a little that grabs the attention, obviously, like something almost inappropriate, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. I dabbled with the name for 2 years. I literally wouldn't start the podcast until I had this almost brand of it. And one day Strategic Slut popped in my mind, and I told my couple friends and my family members, and they were like, oh my God, that's amazing. And now a year and a half later, we have Strategic Slut. It's grown very quickly. I'm really proud of it. And it's evolved more than just love, sex, and dating. It's now talking about all taboos and just really opening the conversation with the intent to, encourage people to live an intentional life, whatever that means to them. Just doing what they feel is right based on all these different information, all these different experiences and things that they've learned and heard.
Yeah. And it's so important. And I love, and this is why I wanted to have you on here as well, is because women have been so oppressed, and with the studies that you took in college and just life study where just even words, like I'm sure there are people that hear strategic slut and are like, oh, it's like
Oh,
taboo,
yes.
and yeah, and have opinions and things on it. So I really truly believe that when we reclaim words as women, like slut, pussy, whore, witch, bitch, all of those things, it takes the power out of the person using it to oppress or degrade, and actually brings back an ownership of that energy, of that piece of us that's like, yeah, I am that. And it's not from a place of shame or dirtiness or evil or any of those things. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of the women's studies that you learned in regards to this, around how medical and religious and kind of just like the overall patriarch that we live in
Yeah.
still today, how that has really shaped, I think in society, I think of like Hollywood in this sense of like women are supposed to like be, silent and look pretty and look a certain way in order to be beautiful or considered successful, or all of those things. So I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about that.
Yeah, so there's definitely like influences that have shaped how we learn about sex, and that has actually translated into how we learn about sex ed in schools. And it's really that course specifically really dove into the questioning of who should be teaching us sex. Why are we learning from teachers who maybe had to do a couple hour course on it, and they're not actually sex educators? A lot of the information is based on religious beliefs and medical discourses, which, there's nothing wrong with religion. Whatever you like believe in and stuff like that, that is okay. But it's the fact that it's actually giving damaging like info to across, North America and other countries that don't have this. So, and you see there are countries that have informative sex ed that gives people the right information to choose accordingly. Where if you see it in North America, I'm going to group Canada and US together, higher rates of sex ed. There's less pregnancy, there's less STIs, there are all the risks that they kind of inform us of. There's actually less rates of that when we have proper education. When we don't, we're left to just wondering about this thing that we see in movies, and hot like actors and actresses screaming, making out. What is this thing all about, right? And it looks fun. And obviously, as you're a teenager and hormones start to change, and you're starting to, whoever you're attracted to, things start to happen, and you're starting to want to explore. And I think truly, when we're denied some information, we really do go search it out on ourselves. So, like in current times, kids have access to so many things at the literally at our fingertips, that they can also be receiving poor information. If they're only learning about sex through porn, they're going to have a really messed up view on how that actually looks in practice, and what to expect from the gender, that you're attracted to, and things like that. So it's really problematic. And the way that the gender implications, it's really like within women, attacked our value. And you can see that even in politics, in the way that certain presidents can be sexual predators. I'm going to use that.
Yep.
And,
Fair game,
and
fair game.
like, yeah, I'm saying it.
Yeah.
And use really predatory language and disgusting language against sex and women and ownership of one's body. Whereas a woman, if there was anything, I mean, look at the things that Hillary Clinton, like the things that were said about her and stuff like that. It all goes down to sex, but how it, affects you in society and in business and all those things is very different between, I don't want to say like men and women, because that's a little too binary, but that's kind of the scale we can kind of use right now, because a lot of people don't even know that exists. So
Right.
it's just really damaging to women. So obviously, like from the start of time, women have been told that they are not sexual beings. They're just kind of there for the taking, that they're meant to be docile and just look pretty and take care of the kids and the house. And when they started to, through like the feminist movements, gain political power and start to go into the public sphere, there's the private and the public being business and politics and those things, they also started to reclaim sexuality of like, I want to have sex with more than one person. And I mean, whether if you're religious and you don't believe in sex before marriage, that's individual, but you should be able to learn about sex and not have to practice it. That's like, it should be your own individual choice. So within education, we're taught, the risks. So don't get pregnant, or it's like the Mean Girls quote, right? Like, don't have sex, you'll get pregnant and you'll die. Like, but here's some condoms. He says, but here's some condoms. It's like, I'm going to give you bare minimum information, but here's some condoms because I know you're going to do it anyways. And that's really damaging to young adults as they're, exploring sex, because then if they do come into those risks, the social kind of reactions to those things, if you're 16 and pregnant, or if you get an STI and things like that, you're suddenly seen as dirty. There's so many implications there that no one preps us for, but then we're not receiving the right information. So it's a really complex topic, but also so important because it's obviously very damaging. And I just think of like Monica Lewinsky, who is like talked about so much throughout pop culture, and yet like there's certain ways we speak on her versus other people, and I think that that's such an important conversation, and to really dive deep into what you've learned, what your thoughts are about sex, and then how that has implicated your own actions, however you navigate, relationships, sex, self-pleasure, any of those things.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You brought up so many important topics. And actually, I recently saw, I think it was about a year ago, Monica Lewinsky did a TED Talk, speaking of Monica Lewinsky, and she talked about how shame culture almost killed her because she was suicidal after the whole thing. She's like, I was 23 and I fell in love with my boss. And she's like, and it was public. This happens all the time with men. Like, it's an amazing podcast or TEDx.
I need to listen to that right now.
It's really good. And it's funny because I had only ever heard of her through at that time, like when it was in the news, and the whole like America country was like, she's the she devil, and like what's wrong with all the things. But hearing her side, it changed the way I thought about affairs and what actually happens to people publicly, especially for women, when that is never the case for men. We're seeing that now, even with President Trump, where he's had all of these different allegations, but the media coverage on it is absolutely not in any way, shape, or form the same as it was with Monica Lewinsky. And absolutely. She wasn't the president. So right. That's huge. And talking about the educational piece, I remember when I had sex ed in high school, and the teacher that I had that was teaching it was a 36-year-old virgin who was super religious. And she basically was just like, it's dirty, it's wrong, you shouldn't do it, or wait till marriage. And I think I was like 16 at the time, and I had sex, and I was like, I can't take you seriously. I can't even relate to you. And I said this in the class, and I think she was kind of like, oh shit. But it was just like, women specifically have a clitoris, which is 100% there for pleasure. It is there for the purpose of pleasure, for no other purpose except for pleasure. And as women, when we're not taught how to navigate our own bodies in a safe and healthy way from young ages, we put that onto men or partners or other people, thinking and expecting that our power and our pleasure come from something else. So I think that is the huge detriment of the educational system to which you're speaking to, where there's so much shame and uneducation that is really keeping us from our power. And that is part of, like in the coaching that I do, is I 100% believe that women's sexuality and finances go hand in hand. Because when a
Oh my God,
woman,
I was just talking about this with another day. Like literally, I truly believe this, that if you like, because it's taboo and it's also gendered.
yep,
Talking about finances and talking about sex is very gendered. It's supposed to come naturally for men and not for women. And
yep,
it's so like, it's so there. And when you can tell your partner how you like to orgasm, you show up differently in the boardroom as well. Like
yep,
it's truly insane how that's so aligned. And what better way to pretend female sexuality and pleasure doesn't exist by not naming the clitoris in sexual education classes and things like that. Like if you think of, I mean, not everyone's experience, it depends on where you grew up and what state and whatever, but a lot of the times they show you a diagram and it's of the reproductive system, but the clitoris is not on there, or at
yeah,
least it's not named, you know?
yeah,
It's a kind of blurred little section that they want to remove because you're just a baby maker,
yep,
apparently,
yeah,
right? And if you choose to not have a child, you're also, what's your purpose in society then? But then if you have
yeah,
children too young, you're a slut, you're a whore, you're this, you're that. And that's like where it's so messed up. We had TV shows about 16 and pregnant and kind of pathologize like those women and their mistakes, even though, is it a mistake? Is it not? Like, I don't know, right? Like it's one of those things that's just, it happened and they had to navigate that with also on a mass scale and a lot of harassment. Just
yeah,
like, as you said, Monica Lewinsky, like that whole shame that's embedded in it. It's not just like a one time, oh, cancel culture, like she said something bad. It is like you are a disgusting human. You have no values, no self respect, and you deserve to die,
yeah,
essentially.
yeah, absolutely. And speaking to the, the girls that do tend that have gotten pregnant, whether they decided to keep the baby or not, it's like, because there's so much shame and uneducation, it's like, had they been given the correct resources and education, that could have been prevented. Yeah, so there's just so much that goes into this, and it's such a great topic. And coming into reclaiming these words around like slut and whore, what is your take on, because your podcast is the Strategic Slut,
Culture,
was
yeah.
that, and I have a feeling that it was intentional in that way to reclaim that word and to change how we use it, how people see it, and would love to hear your thoughts on that too, of reclaiming the
Yeah, so
word.
it was definitely intentional. Like I wanted to dabble with something inappropriate essentially, and bitch was kind of one that I really wanted to use, but there were so many companies that already existed. Honestly, like one of my top podcasts is called The Bitch Bible, and you think of Betches, which is a whole media network, and they have 1,000 different podcasts and just different things like that. That bitch was kind of like taken in that
Yeah,
space, which is, that's fine. And it's not that I even need to reclaim that. I just kind of thought it was like something that also sticks, and it's kind of, I like to swear, I like to say those bad words. So it was one of those things that I definitely wanted like in there, and I couldn't help but to think of those things. And then when Strategic Slut popped in my mind, I did dabble with the word slut, and I'm like, well, what is a slut? Who counts as a slut? What does that even mean? Because if you think of slut, there is no actual definition. It's our cultural and societal understanding of a slut, of the definition. And it's a gendered way of shaming a woman for engaging in some sort of sexual activity, whether that be having sex with 1,000 people or giving the wrong powerful guy like with Monica Lewinsky like a blowjob. It's, what does that even mean? And if you think of like the kind of question, who counts as a slut, it's really interesting because how do we determine that, right? Like,
yeah,
because a whore technically is a paid prostitute, but it's also meant to be in a shameful way. Slut is used so casually. Oh, she's a
yeah.
slut. Oh, she's a slut. Oh, she's a slut. And I was called that so many times in high school, and I was a virgin. And I
Me
remember being
too.
like,
I was a slut before I was a virgin. I'll hashtag me too that.
right? And I was
Yeah.
like, what the like, excuse me? Because I I was shocked because I also grew up not confident. Like I was bullied for being a little chubbier and just like, you know, I think I also just didn't flow with the groups. Like I was always kind of the black sheep, but now that's kind of my power. But like at the time it was a really weird thing. So when I started to like, I don't know, glow up in high school and started to get like attractions from men, then it was this like weird thing of like, oh, she's such a slut. And I remember it feeling so like obviously demonizing of my character and who I am as a person. And then it also made me kind of want to switch and be like, you call me a slut? Okay, I'll show you a slut. Like, let me let me go do what I want to do then. Why am I holding back from kissing whoever I want, sleeping with whoever I want, if I'm going to get criticized either way? And it was kind of one of those things. And it doesn't mean that I acted in that way or not. And if it did, it doesn't matter, because it's like it doesn't affect my ability to do things in the world. And it's also one of those things of like, whose business is it of what you do in the bedroom? And we talk about this a lot in like in gay rights and like the right to marriage and all those things. Who cares like who you're sleeping with, how you sleep with them, how often you do it? And when you ask yourself like who counts as a slut, it's like there's literally no way to qualify it. Like I remember girls growing up like being called sluts, and because they heard a rumor that, you know, they gave like a hand job in the bathroom kind of thing. And it's like, is that what being a slut is? What if that girl was like that, they were in a relationship? Is she a slut because she was doing that with her boyfriend? If you're married, are you a slut in the bedroom as a married woman? Like, it just doesn't make sense, right? Like, there's just no way to actually qualify it or quantify it. And the more I like dove deep, like I actually came up with strategic slut first and then really considered what slut means. And I'm like, no, like screw this. This isn't right, because it's meant to really like really break down anything you've tried to work towards as a woman. And it's not the same for men. If it was just a dirty word that we were all called and had some sort of meaning, like, you know, if you're called a liar, let's say, and it held that same like emphasis for both men and women, it wouldn't be as bad. But it's the fact that it's so gendered, and the fact that it can affect me, the fact that the name strategic slut, people are turned on and off by that. And it's a really interesting thing. And like going through even graduating university and like applying to jobs, like not knowing what I wanted to do with my life, it was like, can I be in a corporate world with the podcast Strategic Slut? Because it implies apparently that I'm a slut too. And it's one of those things that like, whose business is it either? Like, you know, like it's just one of those things. So it's really interesting, and it's definitely affected my like dating life too. Like a lot of men just assume that I'm just like this, I don't know, freak, I guess. And it's interesting because the name is like I always make the joke like strategic slut's been the least slutty. Like I haven't seen a man in a long time, and it's just one of those funny things of like how that perception is kind of validated to be true of why we even need to reclaim the word, because it's obviously so problematic. And if I think of modern context of the WAP song, like by Cardi B and Meg Thee Stallion, how the cultural response to that song was so negative, yet we've been listening to male rappers talk about what they're doing to her and what she's doing to them for pleasure in very disgusting ways. Honestly, I love rap music, but it's disgusting when female rappers can't do the same. It's really messed up. So I don't think when I created the podcast, I knew the weight that Strategic Slut carried. And the more that I talk about it, and the more I learn, and the more that I consider it, it really holds so much more weight than I actually ever like imagined it to. And it's really brought me a lot of, I'd say, gratitude for what I've learned and like my academic studies, but also like my just own experience, because it's helped also lessen the shame around those things. Like, you know, I think that there's so many things within sex and pleasure that people don't take the time to unravel for themselves, and it causes them this really weird thing throughout their lives, a lot of lacking fulfillment in that space, but also if you don't feel worthy to receive like pleasure in that way, sometimes you don't think you're worthy of receiving other things like happiness or success or financial freedom or any of those things. So it's really interesting on how it all intertwines. Sorry, I went on a rampage,
Absolutely.
but it's a
Love the
passionate
rampage. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I could not agree more with everything you said. It's so important, and it's just we have to talk about these things in order to change the dynamics of them and start to normalize talking about sex and for women success as well. So yeah, this was such an amazing conversation, Courtney. And I would love for you to let people know how to find you and what you got going on.
Absolutely. So you can find my personal Instagram at the not so average betch. And the podcast Instagram is at Strategic Slut. My podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You just, search in the term Strategic Slut and it'll pop up. And I upload new episodes every Monday and Friday. Mondays are with guests, so you'll get different voices of knowledge, experience, whatever it may be. Some things are more light and fun, and other times they're really intense. So it's kind of, I'm the middleman between making taboos more comfortable to discuss. And I do solo episodes on Fridays that usually deal with a little bit more empowering content. It's kind of, I look at it as things that I need to hear personally. And it's been really great to be able to connect with an audience in that way. So yeah, that's kind of what's going on. There are new things coming in January, but I can't talk about it too much yet.
To be continued. Yeah, awesome. And those will also be included in the description of this video as well, so that people can click and follow for you. And thanks again so much for being on, Courtney.
Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.